Welcome all of you to this Friday's Fireside Chat. I'm Rita McGrath. You probably know that already. Just a couple of housekeeping things. First of all, let's welcome Flaminia Trentino. She's our new fearsome bouncer. She's just joined our team and we're really, really happy that she's here. This session is being recorded. So do not say anything you do not wish your wife, mother, significant other, the New York Times to see or hear. So just fair warning. I don't usually do raise hands in a session like this because I really don't know who's here. But if you ask questions in the chat, we'll try to get to them. If we don't get to them while we're live, we will respond to them after the fact. So feel free to put things in, and if we get to them, we will. And if we don't, we'll follow up. So my guest this week is Tony Ulwick. I'm very pleased to have Tony back. Tony and I go back a long way, right back to, we were talking about ancient history, his wonderful book, What Customers Want, Using Outcome-Driven Innovation to Create Breakthrough Products and Services, endorsed by one of our mutual mentors and sadly departed good friends, Clayton Christensen. And Tony is the CEO of a company called Strategyn, which does a lot of work consulting with companies on the whole topic of innovation. And I think both of us share a goal of making innovation less of this dark art mystery kind of thing and more of a predictable process that we can follow. So welcome, Tony.
Rita, thanks for the invite. I appreciate it. I like the fire in the background. It's very cozy. I'm enjoying it.
Very nice, yeah. And we've got great coordination going on. Your plant and my jacket are like channeling each other.
Perfect.
It's absolutely perfect. So let's start with this concept of jobs to be done. And I'd love for our audience to hear you put that in your own words.
Sure. So, well, I'll tell my story from years back and how I got interested in this. I have a mechanical engineering background. I started working for IBM back in the early 1980s as a manufacturing engineer. And I worked on a product called the PC Junior.
I'm sorry. I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, it's true.
Wow.
And that's often the reaction I get. Because as you know, Rita, that was quite a failure in the marketplace. In fact, in the Wall Street Journal, the very day after we introduced the product, the headlines read, "The PC Junior is a flop." And I thought, how do they know that already? Right? Well, it just came out yesterday, and today it's a flop. I should at least given it a week or something.
A week, maybe, right?
Yeah, right. But they were right. It was a flop. It took us about a year to recognize that. But I kept thinking, how do they know it was a flop immediately? So clearly, they were using some set of metrics to judge the value of that product that we didn't use to build the product. And my thought was, gosh, if we only knew well in advance, like a week before, 2 weeks before, a year before, or 2 years before when we started developing the product, if we could only know what metrics people are going to use to judge the value of our products, we could just design the product to meet those metrics, and then the headlines would read, "The PC Junior is the greatest thing since sliced bread." So that was the goal, and it took a long time to figure out how to make that happen. But turns out there are a set of metrics people use to judge the value of our products, and they are knowable in advance. And so, when I think about bringing predictability to innovation, the goal that I had in mind to save IBM and others, as it turns out, from this horrible predicament, is that you'd love to be able to conceptualize a product that with certainty is going to win in the marketplace before you even start developing it. That would be ideal. To me, like, that's the innovation process. It's everything up front, everything prior to development. And if we could only figure out which products are going to win before we develop them, that's going to save us a tremendous amount of time and effort. So as time went on, and I entered my product planning phase at IBM for my last 5 or 6 years there, and it occurred to me one day, we've all seen Levitt's quote, people don't want the quarter-inch drill, they want the quarter-inch hole. It finally clicked, and I thought, you know what? Let's not study products at all. Let's study what people are trying to accomplish, the underlying process that they're trying to execute. Now, the reason I like this as an engineer, I thought, well, we can apply the same metrics I used as a manufacturing engineer. There's what do we need to measure and control to produce a predictable output? But let's make that customer facing and say, well, what are customers? How do they measure success as they're going about executing those processes, creating the quarter-inch hole or passing on life lessons to children or whatever the process is? And sure enough, that works. People do use a set of metrics to judge the value of products. Those metrics are knowable because they're tied to the underlying process or job the customer is trying to get done. So then, of course, putting that theory into practice, took years. I spent a lot of time between roughly 1991 when I started Strategyn, through the time I first met Clayton Christensen in 1999, just fine-tuning the process, applying it in a number of companies across the U.S. The first success was with Cordis Corporation. And this was before Cordis was even a J&J company. So this was back in the early 90s. And the goal there was to help them revamp their angioplasty balloon line. They had about 1% market share, and they needed a hit. They needed a home run. So we did the work, and what we helped them figure out was that there were a good number of unmet needs where people are struggling to get the job done. We identified them all up front, so it wasn't just one or two that we identified. We looked at the 100 or so needs of the interventional cardiologists as they're trying to restore blood flow in an artery, and we figured out there was about 20 of those outcomes where they were underserved. So that's where the Cordis team put their heads together and said, how do we solve these outcomes? They came up with concepts. They put them in the marketplace. They had 19 new products within a year and a half, all in different sizes of balloons. They all became number 1 or 2 in the market. The market share went up over 20%. And there was another really interesting thing that we discovered there too. There was one outcome that was highly underserved, very important, poorly satisfied. It was preventing the restenosis, in other words, prevent the blockage from recurring. And they said, well, we have a little device that we're working on in R&D called the stent that could do exactly that. So they tripled down on their resources. They became the first to market with that product. And the stent itself became $1 billion product in just 2 years. And so this is when their stock went from $18 to $108 a share. They got purchased by J&J. It was just a great story. So I knew we were onto something, and we've been refining the process ever since.
So why do companies struggle so much with this? And I had Alberto Savoia recently on the show, and he, of course, is the engineer behind pre-totyping. And his argument is, well, why do we build stuff and hope people will buy it? Why don't we figure out what people want to buy and build that? And I think jobs to be done is very similar in philosophy to that. But why is it so hard for people to get their heads around it? I mean, even now, what are we, 2021? I go to companies and I say, let's talk about, what your customers really need. And they'll say things like, oh, well, from the mainstream production line, they need this. And from the specialty production line, they need that. And I'm like, honestly, customers could care less whether you label your production process mainstream or specialty. What they want is what they want, and it's still so ingrained.
Yeah, it certainly is. I think about this all the time, obviously, but I think there's really 2 reasons why we're stuck in this predicament. And the first is companies love using this ideas first approach to innovation. The concept's been around forever. The goal, of course, is to come up with ideas and then test them, right? Put them in hopefully you don't put them in the marketplace to test them like we did with the PC Junior, but you create the products, put them, in front of customers, get feedback, go back and refine the product and go back to customers and get feedback. And what they're doing in this instance is they're coming up with a product concept and hoping that it addresses enough unmet needs to make it worthwhile. And they're trying to learn if it's doing that as they go out to customers. So it's a very expensive and inefficient way to learn what the customer's needs are, right? So being attached to that mindset, I think, is one reason why innovation fails. And people talk themselves into using this approach. And I'll give you a great example. I'm sure you've heard these quotes. If I asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. Henry Ford. Steve Jobs says, people don't know what they want until they see it. Now, upon first blush, if you listen to those statements, you might say, you know what, I'm an ideas first guy. You're right. Customers don't know what they want. So why should I ever talk to customers about their needs? They don't know their needs. They have latent needs. They can't articulate their needs. Well, if you talk yourself into that mindset, you're never going to succeed predictably at innovation. So I really think that's one of the problems, because Henry Ford and Steve Jobs never meant to say or never said that people don't know their needs. What they're saying is, if I asked people what solution they wanted, they would have said a faster horse.
Right.
And people don't know what solutions they want until they see it. I can buy off on that, right? That's true. And all that says is, well, let's not ask customers about solutions, right? Let's ask them about their needs. Which brings us to, I think, the second reason why innovation fails. And that is, in most companies, there isn't agreement as to what a customer need even is. Now, I've studied this for 30 years, and I find this remarkable because, of course, everybody knows you have to satisfy customer needs. But the sales team's talking about needs as features and products and solutions. The marketing's talking about needs as exciters and delighters. The development team's talking about needs as requirements and specifications. So everyone's thinking differently about what a customer need is. So here you have it. You have an organization that we all know we're trying to satisfy needs, but we can't agree on what a need is. So we don't know what all the needs are. So we can't figure out which are unmet. And now we're trying to come up with solutions that address unmet needs that we don't exist. We're back in the ideas first approach. Right? So I really think those are the key issues. And of course, my view is the ideas first approach will never be the most efficient approach, because at some point you have to know that you've satisfied all the needs. So you're going to get to the point where you have to know all the needs. So if you got to get to that point, let's just start there, right? Let's just start. Let's just discover all the unmet needs first, and then devise solutions to address them.
Yeah, I mean, my experience with this is the customers will say, "Oh, we need more ideas. We need great ideas around here because ideas are what matters." And I totally am with you. And so over the last few years, we've seen this just plethora of incubators and design studios and corporate labs and corporate accelerators, and you name it, everybody's got one. And thousands of post-it notes while we ideate, and so much noise and fury leading to kind of innovation theater, right? It's a lot of sound and commotion, but it doesn't really get you to an actionable conclusion in my view. And so I think you and I are very much in sync on that. So walk us through a process. So you've been handed a job. I'll make this up. Somebody in the haptic touch environment wants to know where a new growth vector might be for their product, right? So let's say I have a haptic mouse here. Where else could we take haptic technology and make it cool, right? Which is a bad specification to start with, right? Because what you really want to start with is why does haptic possibly offer solutions to customer needs? But let's say at a company in that sector, what do you do next?
Yeah, so that's interesting. So what you're saying there, the way I interpret what you're saying is you say, okay, I'm a company, I have a product, and it gets a job done.
Or more capability, right?
Yeah, I have a capability, right? Yeah, I have a technology, a capability. It gets the job done. What other jobs can I get done, right? So if you see these devices, look at the old pointer, if you will, right?
The laser thing?
Pre that.
Oh, the chalkboard thing?
So you've seen those in pictures, right?
Oh, totally. Oh, I used to, when I first started teaching MBAs at Columbia Business School, we still had chalkboards. And I was pretty well known for being a very, enthusiastic and immersive teacher. And so you always knew when I'd had a full day of teaching, because I would emerge from the classroom with like chalk all the way down. And we used those pointers. Totally.
Right. So, those pointers are used to emphasize a point, and you're holding them. And then, years later, then it went laser, of course. That was very exciting.
That was the thing you tortured cats with, right?
I still do. It's very exciting.
Oh, you cool person.
and then, of course, they went digital. So, as soon as you put a battery in, it goes digital. Now you can get more jobs done with that device. So then you go out to presenters and you say, well, what jobs are you trying to get done when you're presenting? And of course, it's not just making a point, emphasizing a point, but you may want to, advance a page on your slide deck. One of the things I would always love for this to do is to translate a question that was asked to me in a language I don't understand into English, so I could understand the question and hopefully provide a great answer. That still doesn't exist, by the way, but wouldn't that be a great feature on a device like that? And so you can start asking presenters, what other jobs are you trying to get done? To me, it's a market selection discussion. In other words, you're saying, I'm already in a market. Are there related jobs that I can get done with the same capability? And so you can go about and figure out, well, what are those other jobs, and decide which ones are underserved. When we figure out which are underserved, we put surveys out to, in that case, hundreds of presenters and say, when you're giving a presentation, how important is it to you that you can get this job done? And how satisfied are you today with your ability to get that job done? So with those two data points, we can figure out, well, which jobs are most important to the population and most underserved. So they become our biggest opportunities. So if there's 30 or 40 or 50 jobs, we can generally narrow that down to the 5 or 6 that matter most. Then we take that into ideation and say, we already know, right? If you can come up with a solution that helps people get these jobs done, they'll buy it because we already have that data, right? So that will get you down the path. There's also another aspect to this too, that we know people don't agree on which needs are unmet. Right? So we have to find segments of people with different unmet needs. So we can segment at this level as well. And maybe half the population thinks these are the 5 jobs that I want to get done. And another 5 thinks these other the 5 jobs we want to get done. So now you can have 2 different products, one aimed at segment A, one aimed at segment B. Right? But this is more of like a market selection discussion. I'd say, and that's probably 10% of our work that we do with clients, but most of them come at it another way. And they say, we're in a market. How do we grow that market? So just like the quarter story, right? In the angioplasty balloon market, how do we win? We're down in the dumps. We need to come up with a winning solution. So what we look at there is we go to their customers to figure out, well, what job are they trying to get done? Well, they're trying to restore blood flow in an artery. Well, let's go study that job, right? So now we're making the job the unit of analysis. This isn't a market selection study anymore. We're defining the market that they're in. Bless you. And then we're going to dig deep. We want to make the job the unit of analysis. Now, what that means to us is we want to study that job and break it down into its component parts. And figure out, how do people measure success along each step of the way? Those metrics are the customer's needs. We call them desired outcome statements. They're the metrics people use to measure success as they try to get that job done. So as the interventional cardiologist is trying to restore blood flow in an artery, they may want to make sure that they can, minimize the likelihood of damaging a vessel as they're making their way through it, or minimize the time it takes to work their way through a tortuous vessel, or minimize the likelihood of puncturing a vessel. And so there's a set of metrics that they're using to say, here's what I'm trying to achieve, and here's what I'm trying to avoid, basically. So in that case, you come up with the 70, 80, 90, 100 more metrics, depending on the complexity of the job, and take it through the same quantitative process. Take a survey, put it out to customers, ask them to tell us, which needs are unmet, which ones are really important and poorly satisfied, and also which ones are unimportant and very satisfied. Now, the reason we do that is because, we think innovation is about getting a job done better and more cheaply. So we want to know, where in the job do you want to invest to get the job done better? And where do you want to divest to get the job done more cheaply? You and I talked about like the razor blade story, right? Like you can keep adding the 5th, the 6th, the 7th razor blade. At some point, you're going to say, you know what? I'm just adding cost. I'm not adding value. And you got to know when to quit, move off, and start developing value in some other dimension. But each project that we're working on is done in a very similar fashion. We define the market as a group of people plus the job. Then we dig down into that job, create a job map, and we have an article from way back in 2008 in HBR, the customer-centered innovation map, that goes into that detail. And then the key, though, is to capture the outcome statements. And this is where most people don't go, right? They'll stop at the job map level. But if you can figure out the 100 metrics that people are using to measure success when getting the job done at a real granular level, now you have insights that usually nobody else has. I'm just looking through some slides here. If you don't mind, I could even pull up an example here.
Yeah, that'd be
of what a
great.
set of outcome statements look like.
Yeah, and what I also like is you have a very disciplined way of prioritizing them. I think people would be interested in that.
Sure, I'm happy to talk about that because that's critical too. It's because what we're trying to do is figure out what are the needs.
Well, customers have an infinitely long list of things you could do for them. I mean, infinitely long. You ask them, well, what are you going to pay me to do for you? That just gets really short.
Yeah, well, that's right. So we have to know how to scope this thing out to make it make sense. But let me share my screen here. And let me blow it up too. But this is generally how we think about need statements. It's a hierarchy, right? We have a job that we're trying to get done. We break down that job into job steps, like using the job map, and then it's the outcomes. So this example here is with surgeons. So this is surgeons removing an anatomical structure. And you can see the steps they go through. I'll take you through that first. Establish initial access, gain visual access to the target structure so they can see it, then figure out how to get there. And then they have to navigate through barriers in order to get to that structure. They have to terminate the blood supply to that structure, mobilize it, detach expected attachments from the target structure, remove it, and then repair or reconstruct the remnant structure. So those are the steps that they're going through. That's what they're trying to get done. And notice as we go through this, we're not saying how they do anything, right? There's no talk of a solution anywhere throughout here. And then we get to that lower level. All those statements below, those are what we call the outcomes. So you can look at these and you notice very quickly, it's not saying, oh, make it easier or faster or more reliable or safer, right? It's really specific, like number 25, minimize the time it takes to isolate the blood vessels feeding the target structure. I think of these things as instructions that are coming from the customer. They're stable over time. They're solution agnostic. They're discoverable. They're knowable. They're predictive. They meet all the criteria that are required to make a good customer need. And this is what we've spent 30 years trying to figure out. How do we invent, and I use that word loosely, how do we invent the perfect need statement? Right. So the perfect need statement has to be discoverable and knowable, right? It can't be something customers can't articulate. It can't be a solution because that's not a need. It's got to span geography. It has to be predictive of success. It has to be measurable and controllable in the design of a product. So we put a lot of thought into defining these statements in a way that instructs sales how to sell, marketing how to market, development how to develop, and R&D where to invest. So you can take a quick look at those and get a feel for what we're saying here. It's step by step instructions from beginning to end how they measure success when getting a job done. And then of course from here you'd want to figure out, well, of these 65 outcomes, where do we focus? So which ones are underserved? And I think I got a slide in here for that too.
So you have that map which shows you the sort of the gaps between, I forget the one, it's like a T-chart almost that you use a lot.
I was going to show you this here where we, what we typically do is we'll put the survey out, like I said, to customers and let them tell us. So which of these outcomes, how important is each outcome? How satisfied are you with your ability to address that outcome using the solution that you're using? And we ask them what solution they're using too. So we know, like in the case of Bosch, using a Bosch circular saw, a DeWalt circular saw, and Makita, and we can get satisfaction ratings of different competitors as we're collecting this data. But here's the beauty of it, right?
That's
so
the one I was thinking of, yeah.
Yeah, we call this the opportunity landscape. Once we know what needs are important and unsatisfied, we can plot them all here on this graphic, and we can pretty quickly see where the market's underserved. So these are important and unsatisfied outcomes. So they represent opportunities to get the job done better, right? And then we have the other side of the equation here too. These are unimportant and overserved outcomes. And these represent opportunities to get the job done more cheaply. So now we know where to innovate to get the job done better, along with outcomes, and along with outcomes to get the job done more cheaply. Right? So this is the kind of information that we have before ideation begins, right? Because now, if I can satisfy these outcomes to a greater degree and cost reduce the product along these dimensions, I have a winning product. How do I know that? Because the customers are telling me, here's where I'm underserved, here's where I'm overserved, right? So that's more or less the trick behind this. And of course, if I could continue just for one more second, let me just back out of this. But there's one other key aspect here too, which is, well, let me start here. But the segmentation aspect has, as I mentioned earlier, people don't agree on what needs are unmet. Right. This is true in every market we've studied. It's been over 1,000. And so what do you do if people don't agree on what needs are unmet? Well, we have to discover segments of customers with different unmet needs. Now, the reason companies struggle to do this is because they don't agree on what a need is. They don't have all the needs. They don't know which are unmet. But once you have that, all that figured out, now you can quite literally segment around the unmet needs. So here's how we do it. It's the opposite of the way it's typically done, right? We're not segmenting by demographics or psychographics and then seeing if there's different unmet needs within those demographics. We're flipping it the other way. We're saying, here's all the needs that customers are trying to satisfy. Let's say, for example, a third of the 500 people that you study think outcomes 10, 20, and 30 are really important and unsatisfied. And another third think 40, 50, and 60 are really important and unsatisfied. And another third think these others are unsatisfied. Well, by using factor analysis and cluster analysis, we can quickly put people in these segments. The ones that think these outcomes are underserved go in segment 1, the others go in segment 2. And now we have these segments, right? And we can begin to look at them to figure out, well, what happened? Right? Why do these people have different unmet needs? And so we've discovered a whole bunch of things. For example, when we look at the dental space, we found that in one situation, patients, dentists with patients that have healthy gums and just a small filling are overserved with the products they use today. Whereas when they approach a patient that has unhealthy gums and require a large filling, they're underserved along many dimensions. Different segments, same job. People trying to reach a destination on time. Well, if you go to the same location each day and you know the traffic patterns and you know the routes, you probably don't struggle to reach your destinations on time. But if you have to travel throughout the city and different locations, different times of the day, in a random pattern, looking for parking places and so on, you do struggle to get the job done. It's very hard to reach your destination on time. Same job, but more or less underserved because of something, right? And what we're trying to figure out here is, what are the reasons why people are more or less underserved? These become what we call needs-based personas. So they're not demographic-based personas, and I almost hesitate to use that word persona, but it's a descriptor of the kind of customer that falls into the segment because they have a unique set of unmet needs for some reason.
Well, and I just want to flag up something, Tony, that is one of my personal bugaboos, which is even today, the vast majority of organizations I work with are wedded to demographic segmentation. Like, one of my all-time favorites is the whole wealth management business. So maybe you're well-to-do, or maybe you're wealthy, or maybe you're really wealthy, or maybe you're really, really, really wealthy, and it's just, it has nothing to do with their behavior or what they need. And a person with $1 million in the bank who's going to be $100 million person in 10 years has probably got a lot more in common with the $100 million person who's 10 years older than they do with the other $100 million people who inherited them. And we just are so stuck on demographics that even today, and I think it's this quantifying illusion that if you can quantify something, it means something, and it's easy, so we do it. And what you're doing here, I really like, because you're getting at behavior.
Well, it's exactly right. We're not making the assumption that people have different unmet needs because they have different demographics, right? That's an assumption, and we've proven that assumption to be incorrect thousands of times. It's very, very rare that the demographic is the reason why people have different unmet needs. It's usually something else, and it usually is along a dimension of struggle to get the job done. Like we know in most surgical procedures, patients that have more comorbidities are generally doctors working in those types of patients are generally more underserved than with healthy, less obese patients and that kind of thing. And so we see trends in different markets that are consistent, but they're trying to get the same job done. But it's hard in this situation, easier in this situation. We have to recognize what those different situations are and be able to solve for each.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I find fascinating, and Victor's asked a question about linking this to strategy, leadership, and core ideas on management. We'll come back to you, Victor. But the thing that I think people often overlook is they get very obsessed with my product, right? My product is this great, wonderful thing. And yet when you look at why people don't buy that product, oftentimes it's not the product. I mean, my favorite illustration of this is 64% of internet shopping baskets are abandoned before anybody completes the purchase. And you have to say, well, why is that? Well, it's because, I didn't realize they were going to charge me shipping, or, it's not going to be, the dress isn't going to be delivered in time for the event I was thinking about, or, oh God, you're asking me to put in my, credit card, and then I don't want to do that. Or, I just parked it there because I'll maybe come back to it later. In other words, there's this whole interior life of customers that we have not, in many cases, gone out of our way to understand. And I think one of the things your methodology does is it kind of forces you to say, well, why did that shopping cart get abandoned? What was the job that we can live without, because you made it so difficult for us on some other dimension.
Yeah, well, you're exactly right. We call all those consumption chain jobs.
Right.
They're all the jobs that,
bless you.
You know that? Yes, exactly.
I have heard that phrase before.
Yes, I do. Yeah, and that's everything all the jobs people are trying to get done throughout the life cycle of the product. They have to purchase it. And that's the example you're giving. It's so hard to purchase. I didn't even get through that step, right?
Right.
And then, of course, I have to receive it, and then I have to install it and set it up and learn how to use it and interface with it and clean it and store it and transport it. And
then it doesn't
dispose
turn on.
of it.
And is it a battery, or is it a,
right.
Is it that I had gummed up I mean, like all these things, right?
Sure, exactly.
People don't understand. I'm very intrigued by this currently with our approach to vaccinations. And, there's this big sort of newspaper headline grabbing motif about, anti-vaxxers versus the rest of us. And, it's great for newspaper headlines, but that's not actually true. I mean, a lot of people who would very happily get a vaccine would do so if it was convenient, if they could figure out where to go, if they knew, who the site was, if it wasn't frictionful to get there. And, I think a lot of people who pontificate, we have nice desk jobs where we can take 45 minutes and go drive somewhere and get a vaccine, and whenever the vaccine's available, we'll make ourselves available, and that's great. You're not in that lucky situation if you're working a shift, or if you're don't have access to ready transportation, or whatever the barriers are. And I think when it comes to me, that's just one class of examples of when it comes to getting customers or patients or your intended constituents to do anything, you have to get rid of those blockers, that friction in the system.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We've done a lot of work on that front. It's adoption issues. Why won't people even consider something? And so those are barriers to entry. Oddly enough, most of them are related to consumption chain jobs. It's too hard to acquire, like you're mentioning. Yep. But there could be functional aspects as well, like people may be unsure of what side effects a vaccination might have. Are they better off getting it or not? Like you said, it may not be that they don't want it; they're just not.
They haven't quite gotten comfort.
Well, as the providers of the vaccine, understanding the job the customer is trying to get done, and understanding what outcomes are underserved would probably be a better approach than just saying, they don't want the vaccine.
Right. That to me is very short-sighted. Yeah. So let me come back to this question about connecting all this to management and strategy, because I think it's a good question. In traditional strategy, we've thought forever about, industry dominates your future. So the idea was you have a position in your industry, and that's going to determine your growth, your profitability, what license you have to play, and so forth. And over the years, we've come to realize that's just a very limited way of looking at how you want to compete. And so one of the ideas I know you talk about, I talk about, is the concept of competitive arenas, where an arena is, there's jobs to be done, and who's going to get those jobs done. So just to take a trivial example, well, not trivial, it's a meaningful example, but it's kind of lighthearted, which is weddings. right? So here we are. Currently, it's May of 2021, and we've been through a year and a quarter, a year and a half of weddings, which have been postponed, downsized, canceled, pushed back, whatever. And once it becomes safe to have weddings again, I mean, what you can predict is a wedding tsunami. I mean, young people that used to have 2 weddings a year, 3 weddings a year. Now we're going to be facing 10, 15, 20, God knows what a number. And so if your target market is somebody in that kind of early 20s to mid 30s age group where there's a lot of weddings happening, I'm afraid that's going to soak up a lot of resources, which otherwise might be spent on other things. So if you're not actually thinking about how am I going to fit my way into that, crush of wedding tsunamis, and you're not really thinking about that as a competitor, you're thinking in a very short-sighted way. So the arena really constitutes jobs to be done, different contenders trying to go after the resources that are dedicated to that job to be done. And then that rolls back into your strategy, right? So who am I going to serve? How am I going to compete? How am I going to win? Why me and not somebody else? And then that flows back into how you're now going to manage the organization. So you can have very successful strategies serving 2 completely different jobs in what might seem to be the same arena. So you use a great example with Motorola radio products, where they used to organize by industry, and then they realized that this was getting them nowhere. Maybe you could tell that story.
Sure. So you're digging in the archives of that story there. Yeah. So that comes back from that was the mid 1990s, but it's a great story. We were talking with folks at the radio products division. So they make the handheld two-way radios that you'd see on the streets with public servants often using. So what we discovered is that there were 3 unique segments of users. So the same approach we talked about here that was on the screen earlier, right? We looked at all the needs of communicating, and we found out that there were a group of people that struggled most in emergency situations. So this might be in the case of a fire or police situation or emergency situation where they had to get information related to other people, other parties very quickly. They had to make sure the other party got the information. They had to receive that feedback and so on. The communication was absolutely critical. So they had to hit the right buttons at the right time quickly without looking at their radio. And so there were a bunch of unmet needs, right? There was another group that want to use their radios discreetly. They might be out investigating, or maybe they just don't like people overhearing their conversations. And so there was a whole series of outcomes associated with this discreet communication. And then we found a third group of people that basically use the phones to help administer their daily workflows and activities. So they were always checking back in with their teams, just planning the next aspects of their day and so on. And each of those segments required a different set of solutions. So instead of segmenting around verticals like they were used to doing, they segmented around different sets of unmet needs, right? And so this goes back to what we were saying earlier. They're all trying to get the same job done, but they have different sets of unmet needs because they're getting the job done in unique sets of circumstances, or they just think about the job differently. And that's the key to discovery, right? Because once you know that there are segments of people with different unmet needs, and you know what those unmet needs are, you know how big those segments are, you know if those people are willing to pay more to get the job done better, then you can start tying it to strategy. Is it a differentiated strategy? Is it disruptive? Where do we need to go in order to win in those different segments?
Mm-hmm. So we kind of talked about where jobs to be done came from, how you're working with it now. Let's think a little bit about how we could use that concept going forward. One of the things I talk about a lot is we're all, like it or not, we're all now in a high uncertainty situation. So we're all in where, innovation has cut its teeth. We're all, I don't care if you don't like being there, but that's where we all are, which is a lot of assumptions we've got to make relative to knowledge that we have. And I've been arguing that the tools that we've honed in the world of innovation, where you're sort of sculpting smoke a lot of the time, are actually really helpful for figuring out what the next step is. So are there specific things that your clients are looking for right now as we think about, I'm not going to say come out of the pandemic, because I'm not sure I can count on that, but as we move to whatever the next phase is, what kinds of things do you see people really hungry for?
It's a great question. So, I see a trend. There's a lot more companies that are trying to build this kind of innovation capability.
Mhm.
We get more discussions on that than ever before. And we've developed programs for many companies that help do that. But what I find interesting is that um, there's two kinds of learnings here. One is companies need teams that can go do ODI, for example, go get the data, figure out, well, what segments exist, what are the unmet needs, and so on. So there's going to be a group of people that are proficient at getting the data necessary to win an innovation. But then there's another group of people that have to take that data and use it to make the right decisions. The sales teams, the marketing teams, development, and R&D. So what we've seen is a lot of the training activities are broken into those two categories. Teaching a smaller group of people, 5, 10, depending on the size of your company, 15 people, how to do ODI and build that
Which stands for
capability.
outcome-driven innovation.
Outcome-driven innovation. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yep. And it's a process we're describing. And then, and then, of course, once you have the information that results from that, like there's a segment of people with 14 unmet needs. Now, what do you go do with it, right? So that has to be activated in some way. So those other teams have to be informed how to use the data. And what we're seeing in a lot of cases, Rita, are requests for a change of mindset. Right. So we've had many companies come to us and say, our teams don't have to be great innovators necessarily. They don't have to know outcome-driven innovation. They don't even have to know jobs to be done. But they have the ideas first mindset. It's let's come up with an idea and test it until we see if it works or not, and then go try again. And it's encouraged. Failing fast is popular. Right. But what we're saying is, well, why should we fail fast when we can get the information to prevent us from failing at all? And, and trying to get that mindset shift inside the organization. So whether you're on the UX team, UI team, saying I have to solve a problem, well, how should I go about thinking about this problem? Let's go to the customer, figure out what they're trying to accomplish, how do they measure success, and let me come up with the best solution to do that. If I'm trying to figure out where to place a button on a screen, what are the outcomes associated with that? Minimize the likelihood of not being able to see it, or minimize the likelihood of confusing it with something else, or minimize the likelihood of not being able to see all my options. Those are all outcomes associated with UX UI interface. So if I know what those outcomes are and I can solve correctly for it, I'll figure out exactly the right thing to go do. So that's a plan, at that level. But now you have the whole product planning team who's trying to figure out, well, what's my next new product too, right? And the same mindset applies there as well.
Do you have tips for how you change the mindset?
Well, a lot of it is some of the things we talked about today, just getting people over some of the myths, if you will. And I tie a lot of this back to.
Do you have some favorites?
Well, I do. The whole concept that customers don't know what they want.
And that needs change all the time. That's another one I hear.
Needs change all the time. Yes, exactly. And customers can't articulate their needs because they don't know them. They have latent needs. All those things are not true, right? If companies are thinking that, or teams are thinking that, they are thinking about needs through a solutions lens.
Yeah.
That's that's the mindset.
Important. That's important.
I know it sounds very simple, but it's hard to get out of that solutions first mindset and into a needs first mindset. But if you can just do that, that really advances the way companies are able to innovate, because now they're taking a disciplined approach to innovation as opposed to a guesswork approach to innovation.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I find fascinating is so much of this mythology around innovation. It's like, you went to bed one night and Steve Jobs emerged from a clamshell with an iPhone the next day. And it's like, no, I don't think so. And so I think we forget it's a discipline.
I'm still trying to get the visual out of my head. Like Steve Jobs coming out of a clamshell, and I'm just trying to get that out of my head.
Emerging from the ocean, fully formed. Yeah,
that's great. Well, yeah, a lot of it is a mindset. So starting there, I think, is critical. Having a number of people within your company that understands. Here's the way I say it: if you're going to be great at innovation, you need two things. You need a great innovation process, and you have to be great at executing it.
Mm.
It's that simple. Think about a lead generation process, right? If you want to be great at generating leads for your business, you need a great lead generation process, and you have to be great at executing it. You want the best people inside your organization. You need a good hiring process, and you have to be great at executing it.
Mm-hmm.
Innovation's no different. So to think that there is no innovation process, or to adopt a guesswork, ideas first approach to innovation, is just giving up prematurely, right? I think what people have to understand is that it truly is possible to discover all the metrics people are going to use to judge the value of your product before you even conceptualize it, right? So once you realize that that's the possibility, you realize that you can take the risk out of innovation and hopefully adopt this type of approach.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things I struggle with is, again, it's germane to this, what happens as we move through this period, whatever that is, people are still, to me, harnessed to the resource allocations that come to them from the past. So, the mental image I have of this is you've got like this elephant on one side of a seesaw, and you've got this little mouse on the other side trying to succeed. But the reality is, in a world where competitive advantages are getting shorter and where entry barriers have come down a lot, you need to be able to continually generate the next generation competitive advantage. So the one that's in place, the one that's powerful today, needs to be contributing to the creation of the next one. And I find that's, everybody nods when I say that. No, yeah, absolutely. And then you get into the actual boardroom discussions about what are we putting money into, and it's a different conversation.
Well, I agree 100%. And the reason I really love jobs to be done thinking is it points to your future vision. Like most products only get part of a job done, and customers want to get the entire job done with a single product, preferably. So there's a lot of difference in there, right? So many of the companies that we work with will set their long-term vision out 5 or 10, 15, 20 years. I mean, even look like, listening to music between CDs and MP3s and streaming services. This takes decades for this to take place, right? But it's all about listening to music. The job's the same. So if you can focus on the same job year after year, like Jeff Bezos has done remarkably well, just help people buy products, same job, every single product. And he's gotten better and better at helping people get that job done. He stuck with that one job and picked that long-term strategy.
Removing friction.
Remove friction, get the entire job done in a single platform. I think that's the approach that companies need to take. So look at where you are today, see what part of the job you're getting done, see your path forward to getting the entire job done. And then once you've gone that far, then we look at other jobs. Now I have a platform that does this. What other jobs can I get done? Right?
Yeah. And what I also think is important to realize is that people think once they've got this like category killer in place, it's the thing that does this better than anybody else. Well, the sad reality is in a competitive market, other people are going to go, oh, well, we could do that. And so what was once this really highly differentiated offer that solves a job better than anybody else on the planet now begins to become more of a commodity. And if I think of a company like Microsoft, and this is something Jeff Moore talks about, a lot of their innovations are not breakthrough innovations, they're catch-up innovations. So the word processor, is it the best word processor on the planet? No, but it's good enough. And it kind of comes bundled with this presentation thing that kind of works well enough. And I've got this, spreadsheet thing that works well enough. And so there's no particular dimension on which there's, and maybe there are, but as I think about the whole suite of things, there's no particular dimension on which this is the best in the world. But it's got a few things that differentiate. In the case of Microsoft, I would argue network effects and standardization. And as long as everything else is kind of good enough, then that can be an advantage.
Well, it certainly can. And there's one other big advantage in fields like that as well. And it goes back to the consumption chain jobs. How much time do people invest in learning how to use Word and PowerPoint and something? I mean, once you know how to use it, which is hard to learn how to use it,
right?
Are you willing to go switch to something else that might get the job done 1% better or 5% better?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
you're
mean, I
not going
know
to do
with
it, right?
me, it's like total muscle memory. It's like I
Yeah,
know where to put this and I know where to
yeah,
put that and I know
yeah,
this. And the fact that it takes me 10 clicks when I really step back and think about it is completely infuriating. But by God, I know how to do those 10 clicks.
yeah.
I'm not giving them up. You'll pry them out of my cold dead hands, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, how much time and effort would you want to spend learning another approach that may cut it down to 5 steps?
Five
Right.
clicks rather than
Right.
10. Right, right,
It's
right.
like
Totally.
it's a huge investment. So, yeah, that's one advantage that a lot of companies that had first mover advantage. People learn how to use their products, and the switching cost to learn how to use something else is just too high. It's just too
Yeah, it's
high.
like you've changed your whole living room around. I mean, it's just disorienting, right? So I want to spend a minute just defining consumption chain because you've mentioned it a couple of times, but we
Yeah.
haven't really defined it, which I think for some of our listeners might be important. So a consumption chain refers to the whole category of activities. So you can think of the chain is comprised of activities and links between activities. So a typical one would be I become aware I have a need, I search for a solution to that need, I decide between alternative solutions, I figure out how to pay for it, I figure out how to contract with it, I fight my way through the process of becoming a customer, and eventually I become a customer, and then maybe and so the point here is that the couple of key points. Firstly, most of us are spectacularly ignorant about our customers' total consumption chain. We don't understand how it all gets put together in the customer's mind. So that's point one.
Yeah.
Point two is because it's efficient, what we do is we specialize functions within our companies on pieces of it, right? So you got the finance group. They know all about things like credit worthiness and how I score you and how quickly you got your forms filled out. Marketing knows all about, where did you enter our system and what did you click on? Production knows all about, what are the order quantities you typically buy, and repairs, they know all about what problems happen in the field, complaints, they understand when you get upset, and. But the problem is, as corporations, we never put that back together. So, you call my archetypal example of this is you call up your cell phone provider or your telecom provider and you get a robot, right? And the robot says, may I have your customer number? And you dutifully provide that. And then 6 or 7 steps down the road, the robot kind of waves its little robotic hands at you and hands you over to a real person. And the first thing the real person wants to know is, please give me your customer number. I mean, I've used this example all over the world, and everybody has this case, right? So these consumption chain things are not they're not trivial. I mean, you may be focused on your bells and whistles and your whatever it is, but if I can't figure out how to pay for your product, I'm never going to become a customer.
Yeah, that's exactly right. They're not trivial at all. And like you said, a lot of them aren't linked. There's information flow that goes from the time you consider buying a product until the time you dispose of the product, right? And it's all disparate. I think that's, there's certainly a lot of room for innovation in the consumption space.
Yeah.
And we see it all the time. Look at, how going to the cloud, for example, has made the consumption jobs of IT so much easier, like installing a product, interfacing with it, upgrading it, maintaining it, right? It's made that so much easier than it used to be. It's a great advantage, right? So you're going to see more and more of that, of course. There's really, we view 3 customer types, just to lay it out. One is the job executor, we talked about earlier, the person using the product to get a job done. There's the product lifecycle support team. They're the team that executing all the consumption chain jobs, making it easier to purchase and install and set up and dispose of it, and so on. And then there's the buyer. A lot of our markets, the buyer is not either on the product lifecycle support team or the job executor. The buyer is somebody else. It could be a buying group in a lot of medical spaces, right? And they have their own set of metrics that they use to decide product A or product B. They're generally cost related and performance related at little higher level metrics. But those are the 3 customer sets that we consider when we're helping companies grow. And of course, if you want to put the pedal to the metal, look at all 3, right? How do I create value for each 3 of those constituents?
That's super in-depth. That's very valuable.
Yeah.
So we had a couple of questions about kids and jobs parents need to get done and jobs schools need to get done. And I think as a society, we're going to be doing a lot of thinking about that. Have you done any work at all in that area?
Sure have. We did a project for a major education company about 5 years ago now. And we studied the job that the parents, the students, and the teachers are trying to get done. Now, there's a lot of overlap in what they're trying to accomplish, right? Because they're trying to help the student basically. And, we've come up with, we know what the unmet needs are. We came up with different solutions, and that company's been flailing in terms of staying in the education space. So they haven't made much progress on that. But we're thinking of publishing some of that data and making it more readily available so people can see what the ultimate solution looks like.
I mean, one of the most interesting things to me about education is, as has become abundantly clear in the last year and a half, is education in many cases has two dominant jobs, and then a whole bunch of others. One is this sort of, for older students, it's the coming of age. For the younger students, it's the socialization, it's the sort of forming of their basic levels of competency and those things that need to be done sort of in person by nurturing and so forth. And then there's the sort of transmission of knowledge function. Yeah. And I think we've always assumed that the two were tightly aligned. And what we've learned this year is, like, Zoom does not substitute for play dates. and Zoom does not substitute for the kegger on the college campus. And I think we're going to have to get a lot more sophisticated about what is that job. And do we serve ourselves well by lumping them all together in the same big bucket? I'm not sure that we do.
I'm sure we don't, right? So, there's the education component, as you said, which is very functional. And then there's all the emotional, social aspects too, which, don't come from the education component, right? So, and that's why people want to go on campus and go to college and hang out with people. There's a lot of jobs you're going to get done. So if you think of it that way, college is a platform that helps students get lots of jobs done, right? And we've studied some of this. We've done this for banks. Banks, they're buildings. People go to buildings to get lots of jobs done, right? Hundreds of them, in fact, and we've studied that. People use social media to get lots of jobs done, right? And knowing what those jobs are is critical. Just a quick story with a social media company. We looked at all the reasons people are using social media, and then we organized them in such a way to figure out, well, are people really trying to get 200 jobs done, or are they parts of other jobs? And we could net them down to 9 different jobs. So it appears as though people are trying to get hundreds of things done, when in fact, it's really a handful. But the interesting thing was there are no social media platforms that get any of those jobs done from beginning to end. So we still think
there's room in the market for a breakthrough.
There certainly is. Yes.
That's great. Geez, I'm looking at the time. This is flown. Thank you, Tony. So how do people learn more? Where can they go to find out more about Tony, find out more about the concept?
So we have a free book that's both ebook and audiobook, and that can be done. John Dunn just put it up in the chat at jobstobedonebook with hyphens in there.com. So that's very useful. The Strategyn website has plenty of articles and downloads there as well.
And great webinars, really great webinars.
It has a number of good webinars.
I'm a fan. I watch a lot of them.
Oh, that's great. And also, just like you, Rita, I have a Medium account too, which I put some of my more personal thoughts and not well vetted stuff out there yet that's still churning in my head.
Absolutely. That's great. Well, Tony, Ulwick, and John, hello. And thank you so much for spending this hour. This has been really insightful. And I think we'll be seeing a lot of interest in this jobs concept as we work our way to the next phase of whatever this is. So thank you so much. And have a great weekend, everybody.